Synod. He's our endorser, works with all the chaplains, and he's going to present today a little bit about chaplaincy in the Missouri Synod. And I want him to speak in particular about how our Missouri Synod chaplains can work with civilian congregations like ours, and how we can kind of go hand in glove to serve our military members and other people stationed all over the world. He's going to have, we said, 30-minute presentation, and then we'll have time for Q&A and discussion, because part of this is not just to say, rah, rah, look at how wonderful we've done, but what can we do now going forward with what God has given us. So Chaplain Muehler is going to be a huge part of that, and I'll give it to him, but think of questions you want to ask, especially provocative and uncomfortable questions.
Thank you, Pastor. Well, first of all, again, thank you for allowing me to be here. And I'll probably take even less than 30 minutes. I'll give you really the strategic overview of what Ministry of the Armed Forces does, but I really would like to get to the practical, where the rubber hits the road, which is right here where you are in the middle of this big military K-town, where you have a lot of military families and opportunities. So I know some of you do know the Ministry of the Armed Forces, but I'm going to go to the lowest level that maybe some of you have never heard of us or what we are. So Ministry of the Armed Forces has been probably part of Synod, as far as we could tell, since actually just before World War II. The first commission started, it was 1939, so everybody saw the writing on the wall about the war. But we've always had chaplains. CFW Walther, well, actually, I'm going to back up. I got to introduce my team. We call this our confirmation pictures. So none of us look like that anymore, except for Lee. Lee probably looks the same. Right, Brian, you probably say, she hasn't aged at all, but Steve and myself, we got a little older. But that's our team for Ministry of the Armed Forces. We work in the cubicle world there at the International Center, and we fall under Office of International Mission, which we've been nested since Synod started this program. It's always been Board for Mission Services or Missions. We've always seen it as a mission place, and I think it's the right place to be, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But that's our team right there. So we're pretty joint, and we don't inhale. We all keep our cultural certificates there. But we don't have Air Force officer, but of course Lee keeps us up with the Air Force lingo, and I have to go to her once in a while and say, what does this mean? The great Lutheran question, right, for an Air Force. But I'll start off with my first dad joke. So once the Space Force got established, when I would go out recruiting pastors to be chaplains, I'd get some young pastor who says, well, I want to be a Space Force chaplain. I want to go to Mars. I want to be the one up, into space, maybe circle the space for a while to be a Space Force chaplain. I said, well, you'll have to be an Air Force chaplain first, because they're like the Marines. They don't have their own chaplains either. So Navy chaplains serve Marine Corps, Coast Guard, all sea services. And the Air Force is always going to provide chaplains for the Space Force, because they're never going to be big enough to have their own chaplain corps. I said, but if you get assigned to us Air Force and then you become Space Force, then you will become a pastronaut. There's my dad joke. So we have 3 pastronauts right now, 3 chaplains that serve with the Space Force. All right, so we also have a committee. It's a little bit outdated because Gary just retired, so we've got a couple new folks, but this has also been going on since World War II, where we have a line officer, either a general or an admiral, who serves as the chairman of the committee. It's kind of an advisory board, so a lot of military support, vetting, questions come up. And then we have 3 retired chaplains. Again, we try to keep a diverse of all the service branches. And so they're kind of advisories to us at the Ministry of Armed Forces Committee. And so that's what I wanted to get to. This is our first chaplain during the Civil War. He was endorsed by CFW Walther, part of the Ohio Regiment, to deploy with them during the Civil War. So it's been a long time that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, probably a year or 2 after they were established, sent a chaplain to be with their military folks who were deployed in combat. But I think for us in our experience, and I know we've got chaplains here, I would say Probably the biggest advantage that we have as Lutherans are, one, our doctrine of vocation. I think we've always understood from Luther, whether you're a baker, candlestick maker, or even a soldier. Remember when Luther wrote, "Can soldiers too be saved?" It's a pamphlet. If you haven't read it, it's online with like 50 different translations, but it's really a brilliant piece that we still use today when you unpack how does a Christian serve in the military. And so he unpacks, first of all, the vocation, and then he uses the example of John the Baptist didn't tell the soldiers to quit the military. He just said, be honorable, don't do bad things. And that's the same thing what we would say now is if things go sideways, you're just an honorable person in your vocation, whatever your vocation is. So the doctrine of vocation is critical. I think even during Vietnam, when our country was not treating our service members very well, maybe some of you are Vietnam vets, can attest to that personally and professionally, how horrible it was. But I think the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, from my understanding, get some other historians, but was always pretty good about supporting the troops. And I think it really had to do with our vocation, that these people answered the call, whether they were drafted or whether they joined up to be, in the profession of arms, but they did it as a vocation under Romans 13 and a service to their country. And so that's what we kind of do now. We find pastors, chaplains who will be willing to step into the military, armed forces, and provide and facilitate care for all military personnel. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit, and that'll get to Nathaniel's question about what can we do to work with our congregations. And I had a nice conversation with our Wells brother over there. We're talking about, contact pastors, how they do it. We need to share best business practices, if you will, because while they don't have chaplains and we do, there may be a time when we don't have chaplains anymore, and we need to pivot and learn how they do things, working with congregations near bases, stations, and installations, or overseas like this, to be able to be there for our Lutheran personnel who are assigned away from home churches. There's no Missouri Synod church around. So that's kind of a big thing that I do in the Ministry of the Armed Forces, is basically anything military connected, whether it's chaplains, families, and then our military personnel. It's one of those things, again, we had a nice long lunch conversation about one of our challenges is, which would help you here, is how do we connect with these young kids? Mainly our flock is 18 to 25-year-olds, probably most of us, right? That's what we agree is the major, except for us old people that stayed in and make a career out of it. But 18 to 25-year-olds, and there's nothing going on in your life at 18 to 25, right? So there's a lot of stuff going on. So trying to get our parish pastors, our moms and dads, grandmas, aunts and uncles to be very intentional when someone joins the military to give us their name. It's sort of like campus ministry. It's another big emphasis they're trying to do. When they go off to college or the military, that's where we lose a lot of them. So how can we improve our communication to get us their name so at least we can have a pastoral call with them? So if we get a name of a service member who we have a Missouri Synod chaplain nearby, that's awesome. I'll just talk to the chaplain. He'll go visit him and invite him to the Lutheran service or just make a pastoral call on him. But since we have such a shortage of chaplains, the odds are that there's not going to be a Missouri Synod chaplain there. So that's where we get into we call it Operation Barnabas, and I'll unpack that more, but congregations who are by bases, stations, and installations who have an intentional ministry to the base and have worked with the commander to try to get access and to do different things. So then we can say, hey, we don't have a Missouri Synod chaplain, but there's a great Missouri Synod church, church right outside the gate. And here's the pastor's name. They'll help you get transportation. We'll do whatever we can. So we just need to do more coordination with that. So that's kind of what I want to be, as a clearinghouse for people who are Missouri Synod, who join our military, to not just give up and say, well, it's just such a big organization, they're going to get sucked into it. And I get it. I know that's that age too, that we've had a couple of those where grandma says, hey, Bob is a Marine at Camp Pendleton. Do you have a chaplain there? I said, oh yeah, I do. So he hasn't been to the Lutheran service or out in town, so the chaplain makes a visit and says, yeah, I know you're there, but he hasn't told grandma that he quit going to church, even though he knew where it was. So we do run into that, but still that personal contact that now he knows he's got a Missouri Synod chaplain or a church outside of town that he could go to and reach out to. So That's really an important part of what we do at Ministry of the Armed Forces, is to keep that coordination going, to serve and protect religious liberty for our chaplains and our service members. So that's why I think if you ever hear any military-connected problems, like when you were reading that letter from that senior chaplain, I don't know if that was Shaw that was in charge back then, or who was the endorser. Okay, so that would have been an endorser call, I think, to say to that senior chaplain, you can't do that. That's illegal, immoral, and unethical. You can't kick the Lutherans out of the chapel. But as you said, what they meant for evil, God meant for good, and here you are, because they did that, right? Oh, yeah, okay. So that's kind of what I do too, is just kind of be top cover for our chaplains so they can be free to be faithful, to be good confessional Lutherans. And if they get any pressure from senior chaplains or line officers, I can intervene and just make a call or whatever and say, hey, look, this is what our church believes. We're in a Department of Defense, all the policies, instructions, doctrine supports religious liberty, that you could basically do the tenets of your faith, of your religious organization. But there's always pressure. We live in a tough time, so there's always battles going on. I mean, I think it's the same thing even in a parish, right? You always have those red lines. You got people pushing and pulling, trying to get you to go a little bit further than you should, to try to test you. But Ministry of the Armed Forces has been put in place just to be that communication, that connection to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And of course, we obviously have to give my plug to my boss's boss. President Harrison, as you know, is a very big supporter of this ministry. And he always, whenever he comes down to our cubicles, asks how everybody's doing. How can we help? If there's pressure, especially under some, we know voting has consequences, right? So sometimes pressures were there. How are we doing? How can we support and help? And whether we can stay in this. And so my argument to him so far is just, hey, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. One of my generals once said that, and that's so true. You got to be present at the table to fight for the religious liberties and to take care of our young men and women. Because I think chaplains have more protections than a lot of our other soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine guardians have in some respects. In fact, so I'll use one more example of just being a point of contact. I got a call from a young lady who was studying to be a doctor in the Air Force, and she had a full ride to Oklahoma medical school, then just was going to go to the Air Force to finish her training. So she was, I don't know what they call the medical program that she was in, but I didn't realize this, and that was just a shock to me. I should have known it, but I guess most medical schools require that you have to perform abortions and you have to do transgender care to get your licensure. And she ran into that, and obviously she wasn't going to do this. Here's this young lady, brilliant lady, who just wanted to be a doctor for our military personnel, and she ran into this big, huge pressure that she would have to compromise her conscience and her faith. So finally her pastor goes, well, I think I heard Craig talk somewhere at a presentation, so she gave him my number, and she called me. I said, absolutely. I have 2 Liberty lawyers on speed dial on my phone at all times. So I called one of them. She just got promoted under the Veterans Administration. But Danielle Runnan, she's also a reserve JAG officer, but she works for First Liberty Institute. So she was also Air Force. She was able to help this young lady write the accommodation paperwork, which we were talking before, paperwork, right? You just got to do it. But to help her fill it out, make sure every I was dotted, every T was crossed, and she was able to get the exemption, so she didn't have to do the abortions or the transgender care to get her license. I didn't realize that was a big deal, but that's not a topic for this discussion. But my point was that military connected, we have ways to reach in and help them. So please keep that in mind. So that's our vision, is basically, again, Christ-centered, wherever they're called to serve in the military. And that's probably our biggest connection, is when they are on bases or on ships or deployed in austere and places where civilians can't go. We can have chaplains there that can bring the word and sacrament ministry to them. And then, so one of my jobs, as I mentioned, is to recruit, but also to endorse and sustain a professional ready military chaplaincy. So we just want to make sure that we're either going to hang together or hang separately. So it's really critical for my chaplains when we have our get-togethers to know that we are united. So we can't have one chaplain doing something like open communion for everybody at the general Protestant service, and then another Missouri Synod guy follows him and says, I can't do that because this is my, he goes, well, wait a second. Craig did that, and he's Missouri Synod. How come you can't do that? So we really want to keep united, walk together in our confessional faith, and let them understand that this is what we can and can't do to be faithful. So that's the number one, confessional integrity. We are going to make sure that we're Lutherans, and that's important. Compassionate, community, courage, nothing really different there about it. But this is the one I want to unpack a little bit. The Army and the Air Force use perform and provide, or performing and providing, I think. Did I get that right for you? Air Force, is it performing, providing? Provide, perform or provide. So we'll unpack. What that means is provide or for. Yeah, there you go. That's right. You were. Yeah, provide or provide for. But basically what that is saying, and again, that's our doctrine of the two kingdoms. I guess I never followed that point. That's the other important part about Lutheran understanding, is the two realms, how we can function as a military officer and as a pastor. How does that all work together? And our uniforms really say that the most, because you'll wear your rank on your right and the cross on the left if you're wearing the uniform that has it. Now it's on the shoulders or it's on top of each other here and there. But you're walking in the two realms. You're a military officer, but you're also a called and ordained servant of the word. And so you have two accountabilities. So the provision piece that we're talking about is they all realize that you are sent to the Department of Defense as a chaplain to provide for your own, to reach out and provide word and sacrament ministry to your own, conduct Bible studies, confirmation, everything that your church does. That's your number one reason you're there. The military does not do any religious training. They just take what the church says that, okay, this person is a full up round, they're professionally qualified, and now they'll teach them how to wear the uniform and to function in the military and that kind of thing. And obviously there'll be other challenges, but that's really important to understand that that's the free exercise clause. That's how the Congress, or we've been able to win even in court, because the atheist groups or humanist groups have been trying to get rid of the chaplain corps altogether, because how could you have government pay? That whole separation of church and state issue gets unpacked there. But what the courts are saying is it's about provision, free exercise. Wherever our service members are, American citizens are, they should have the right for free exercise of their faith. And facilitate for others, and that would be the provide for piece for the Air Force, is if you have a young man or woman who is not Lutheran, but they come to you, they're maybe a Roman Catholic. Again, with our two kingdom theology, we understand, okay, I'm not going to compromise who I am, but this young soldier has the constitutional right to practice their faith, so I will get them in touch with a priest or bring the priest to them, or somehow, or my chaplain assistant will do it. Somehow we will work it out to facilitate. And some people have a hard time with that, and I'm open to talk about that. But I view it as, if we flip it around, if your son or daughter's chaplain happens to be a Mormon, because the chaplain is assigned to a unit, it's like the box of chocolates, right? You get what you get. You never know what you're going to get. So if your chaplain is a Mormon, your Lutheran kids should be able to go to the chaplain and say, hey, chaps, I need to go. I want Lutheran communion, or I want a catechism, or I want to talk to a Lutheran pastor. He'll pick up the phone and say, hey, Chaplain Muehler is over here at this other battalion. Hey, Chaplain, I got one of your Missouri Synod kids here. Would you be able to meet with them? Can we get you to them, or I'll go over there? But that's the way it's supposed to work. You facilitate for others or provide for others, whatever their faith may be. And then the care is obviously pastoral care for all. And I think that's important too. And that's part of why we're in the mission field under our mission department, I think through Synod, is, as we know, there's a lot of them that are unchurched or whatever, but they're going to come and talk to their chaplain. And that's where God opens doors in this mission field for the chaplain to be able to bring the law and the gospel to these young people when they come to him with the struggles of life. And that's what I think people understand, is that there's a lot of times they will never darken a church door, whether they're on liberty or leave, but they will go talk to their chaplain, because that's the safe space that the military has carved out for all military people to talk with absolute confidentiality. So that will draw kids who will never normally come, but I got to talk to somebody, and here's the only safe place I could talk, because everybody else is a mandatory reporter, or they're going to tell my senior leader or whatever, I got a problem and I just want to work through it. So something simple as that can lead to many times of a relationship and then catechesis and eventually see how God opens doors. And the advice piece is, I put that in there because for the Navy they break it out that way, but I know the all branches have that. That's where you're the advisor to the commander too. So the commander, it's a lonely place at top. So you're the only one that can walk in there and just shut the door and say, how's it going, sir? What can I do for you? How are you doing? Because it's lonely at the top. It can be in command, especially with different issues coming on. So that's kind of how it breaks out the chaplain role. But I want to talk about here, and this is probably where I think your congregation would fit in and all of the ones outside of our bases. We have a program called Operation Barnabas. It was started in 2007 at the Synodical Convention. It was basically right during the surge on the War on Terror. So we had a lot of reserve chaplains who were being mobilized for the war. So the congregations were left without pastors. The pastor's family was still there. We really weren't prepared for that. How does that work to take care of them? So they came up with an intentional plan to help take care of people who were deployed. They called it Barnabas, which of course is a great name because son of encouragement. He's the kind of the quiet guy in the Bible you don't see or hear a lot of, but he seems to be a fixer, a mender of relationships, right? A supporter, an encourager. So it's great. So I think it's a great name. So Operation Barnabas has really expanded to basically a network of care for all veterans, active duty, and family members, any military connected people, how we can reconnect them with the church and with Jesus, when they're on active duty and then when they get off active duty. If they haven't been in a church for a while, how can we as congregations be more intentional in reaching out to them with the gospel of Jesus Christ? So that's what Operation Barnabas. That's kind of our mission statement. Engage, empower, and equip faith communities to provide hope and healing. And so right now we have about 600 congregations who are actively involved in Operation Barnabas, which still, I don't know who's a statistician. I think we have like 5,000 congregations. I guess I should know that as a synodocrat, how many congregations we have, but we're way below still going that long to try to get congregations. But when I travel and preach at different places, our church has just always been doing it. Inevitably, I'll go to a church and the pastors praying for them in the prayers of the church, or there's a place somewhere in the church of the narthex or the fellowship hall somewhere where there's like a memorial thing of all those who have served, or maybe they got lost in war or whatever. There's always again been that support, but we're just trying to connect everybody together. So I got President Harrison to do a poster for the Navy. It's a picture of a carrier. Preach on this. So that's your 3,000 members of your congregation who are stuck with you at sea. So if they want to hear a sermon, they're going to come to you. And then that's Charles Versoge on the top right when he was chaplain at the boot camp at Marine Corps Station in San Diego. And that's me with some veterans in Southern Illinois. But that's what we do. We're just military connected, and that's why obviously our relationship with this congregation is huge. Again, I tried to find some things, but I don't know how involved the endorser was. My predecessor in the 80s, it would have been Shaw took over in about, I have to go look through Jim Shaw, Jonathan Shaw's dad, was the endorser probably for a lot of that, because when I came on active duty in 91, he was still the endorser, so he might, from his place in that, he was still stationed in Virginia at that time. That's where the office was. But it's always keeping an eye on how can we support military personnel and their families. And I'm sure he was a big piece of this behind the scenes of trying to support you all. And I think this is what I think is just the poster template of what my dream is. And I talked to the boss over there, David, Pastor Preuss is here, to figure out how we can do better leveraging our military people to do church planting, because as you were just talking about, the 2 or 3 year rotation can be so frustrating to, everybody, you got a great Lutheran group and then they all PCS at the same time, and it gets frustrating, and now you got to start all over. And to have the right vision of that, to say, well, actually, you're just helping train and catechize those 2 or 3 years, and they're going to go somewhere else, and maybe they can repeat it. But there's always somewhere opportunities for a core church planting, I believe, to do that. And now the other thing is, who's going to do it, right? You got to find the people. I know I was just daydreaming with when I first got it, because I get the calls, and it's heartbreaking. You know, my son's in Guam. Is there anybody that can give him communion? Or no, I got nobody. So they'll have to fast for 3 or 4 months without the Lord's Supper before a ship can come through. Or actually, OIM has really been helping, and we're partnering with them again by sending Charles Ferry, or he'll send somebody over in that AOR to do a baptism or communion, and to somehow work together to do that, because it just breaks your heart. You know, that's a long time. Or Okinawa, sometimes we'll have 3 or 4 chaplains there, and then they're all gone, and so then there'll be a month that they won't have any Missouri Synod presence there, and it's not easy to get to, so it's really hard to do. And that's again why I was picking my brother's ear there at Wisconsin Synod, how they do that, because they do that very well with the contact pastors, and how to get out there and make that known that we're here to help them. Even if we don't have a chaplain, maybe there's a congregation, or we could do a church plant or something like that. But I guess I'll leave it there. There's our contact information, or Lee always tells me, like us on Facebook, I guess. But I don't know how many people do Facebook anymore. It's my age that does it, right, I think. So if you're my age, like us on Facebook. If you're not, we're on X too, I guess. Yeah, we're on Instagram too. I don't have it on there. I don't even know how to use it. It's on my phone. But I have a contract with Becky Rogness, who is our communications. She's a pro. She used to work for Congress. I think it was, Brian, do you remember who the congresswoman she worked with from Minnesota? Michelle Bachmann. She was her social media guru. And that's how she met Noah, who she married, who's now Pastor Rogness. It's small synod, right? There's always those cool connections. But she's a pro at social media, so we got her pretty cheap to help us do social media to help get the word out. So if someone is traveling somewhere, and again, I don't think it's ever worth a waste of your time, because there's times how someone will call me and they say, well, I'm going to Afghanistan, or I'm going to somewhere, but I don't know. So I can at least connect them to chaplains who are deploying on the, SIPR side, or the NIPR side, we'd say, right? The unclassified. They just send email through Gmail, say, hey, just introduce each other, and then they'll give each other their SIPR email, the classified network, and then they can talk and find out how to connect for communion, or to go to a forward operating base, or that's the other thing of Guam. I was trying to coordinate that, but the subs come, you can't tell them where they are, and the ship's movement is all classified, so it's hard to coordinate. So you have to get them to talk, on the SIPR net and say, hey, my ship's coming in 3 days. If you want to tell all the Lutherans on Guam, meet me at the pier, and we'll have communion, But again, after, if you have to go, maybe some of you have in the military have gone a long time without communion. So it's kind of a big celebration when they can finally find a pastor to give them the Lord's Supper, and they can commune with other Lutherans. So right then, I think we got plenty of time for questions, or what was the other word you used? Discussion of, to push me, ask me tough stuff, or how we can work together. On active duty, we're down to 60. We used to have, probably when you were in, over close to 200, right? Yeah, and I think when I first, they're all Missouri Synod. Those are Missouri Synod. Yeah, those are Missouri Synod. We have 115 total, counting Guard, Reserve, all DOD, Department of Defense, chaplains, somehow connected. So, yeah, the numbers are getting small. So we'll see. We've got a couple. It's one of those things where we had the surge after 9/11, but all those are now hitting 20, 25, 28 years, so they're retiring or going off. So I'm trying to bring in more, obviously. So I need to institute a policy that you have to train your relief. You can't get out until you bring somebody. So somebody over here who's getting ready to retire, you need to bring me one Air Force Reserve chaplain. So we can let you go. I don't get a vote, but it'd be nice. Yes.
I figure this is probably obvious for Germany, but are we expecting any LC happens in Germany?
Well, I don't know. I only know
I should say the next couple of years.
I don't know. As you know how the PCS goes, we don't know until maybe a year out. But so far, nobody in the next year that has at least not let me know anyway. But actually, you're a good connection. I had a little sea story here. Hopefully this is going to be a good story soon. But I went to St. Paul's Lutheran High School in Concordia, Missouri. It's our boarding high school. So you get small connections there. So the executive director wrote me and said, I've got a young gal who lives in Concordia who's getting married to an Air Force guy, but she said she's not going to marry him unless he becomes Lutheran. So do you have any Missouri Synod chaplains that can take him through catechism? It turns out he works on A10, so he's going to be coming to your base. So hopefully you guys are connecting, right? So he's going to take him through confirmation when he gets here to, I forgot what's the air base you're by, so here again, it doesn't happen all the time, but with that great connection, so now she can marry a Lutheran and they can do your marriage, a Missouri Synod Lutheran. It's like, oh yeah, exactly. Since he's getting there, he'll be there 3 years, so that'll help the church. 2 years. Oh, it's only 2 years for them? Okay. But 2 years, you got for the church plant, right? Got some people regular coming. So that was yes, sir. I think probably, other than just internally numbers, trying to get more, but for the ones out there, it's still just that understanding of what pastoral ministry is. So we have just 2 cases I shared at lunch. One, like especially the Army right now, I'm trying to work with them, no offense, but they have a C4 class where they're taking all their chaplains for world religion. See, I guess we're spoiled because our pastoral formation is so good, with that brick and mortar, face to face. When they come out, they are so well trained with their fieldwork, vicarage, and their parish experience that they can just jump into pretty much any pastoral situation, because they've walked alongside people in trauma and tragedy, whether it was a stillborn or somebody killed in a car accident. You get all that trauma experience, but some of these chaplains are coming from online, no pastoral experience at all. And so now they're moving up in charge, and so they're teaching classes, like they even teach homiletics in the Army now, which the Navy could never do that. They don't call it, it's not really the Bible, it's just public speaking, right, I think. But they have this group at C4, they were taking them to world religion, so they're taking them out in Columbia, South Carolina to different religions. So one of them was the Sikh, or Sikh, which one's the professional, right, Sikh? Anyway, well, we thought, okay, you're just going to go see the building, you take a look at it, this is what they do, you see what an Eastern Orthodox, but they actually wanted them to get their feet washed by and then their head wrapped up and go basically fall under their authority to see what they do. It is like, so only 10 out of the 40 refused to do it. And so it's like, so we're working that with the chief of chaplain's office, but it's like, you can't do that. I mean, that's crazy. I don't understand that. But I think, again, it's because they don't have any formation. So it's a challenge for our guys who come in with all this pastoral heart, and we use the term sales order, right? The soul surgeon. You're there, and then you got guys that just don't even get it. They're really behind. And the other one that's really been horrifying for me, it just happened before I got on the plane, was they're having a death and dying training. It's kind of a joint Army and Air Forces doing it, and they're using cadavers. I think they have 4 cadavers, and then they're having chaplains who work at the hospital role play different faith groups. So one cadaver is a Norse pagan, one is a Buddhist, and one is some other faith group, and then you as a chaplain are going to have to be with them and provide pastoral care to them as they die. And the pre-reading coming out says, make sure you bring a knife so you can give it to the Norse pagans so they can die with a knife in their hand. And here are some pagan prayers that you could say when they're dying. And then here's some Buddhist, it's like, where did this come from? So I think the biggest challenge is just back to the basics of, we don't do that. I mean, you don't want a priest to be doing a rabbi or a rabbi to do a Catholic mass. I mean, we don't do that. That's really is establishing a religion. So that's where I think the lawyers will come in. But I think they just do it because, again, they don't have any a real understanding. I don't know, I hate to say it without being too judgmental, but I think that's constantly the education, and you could probably even, I don't want to take some of Mike's time, but he's still in it. So I don't know what he sees from his junior chaplains or what some of the pressures are, but a lot of it's just being naive. But if you just explain to them, usually they'll, oh, okay, that's why I can't do this, or this is what I can do. And then they see our chaplains working. I mean, we're pastors, so they do well wherever they are. I don't ever have any calls from the senior chaplains or commanders about performance. The only time they'll call is when they try to pigeonhole our guys into doing something that they can't do, and they have to, take a stand. But it's never, hey, your guys are not qualified or not trained very well in this or that. It's like, no, they're good pastors. They're doing well in there. So I think the challenge is to keep our formation the same. Really do, it's so important to have well-qualified chaplains. It takes a long time, but I think it's worth it in the end. So I don't know if that answers your question. Yes, sir.
I'll dig in on what actually is not. So when it comes to chaplain challenges with the recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the military stuff actually talk about where, on one side they're like stuff, and the other side have it, and movement towards allowing some of that so that process that the counseling stuff that
Great question. We've made progress on the actual counseling, but if they've been given a medication for anxiety or depression, they have to be off of it for a year. And I think they're still looking at that too, because obviously, once again, that's probably, I'm seeing still now, like used to ADHD was the thing everybody gave them, right? During that time, just give them some drugs or whatever. So if they say that, then there is a waiver. They have to wait for a year for that. But they are doing better at waivers but there's still once in a while you run into the antiquated. I had one guy that was perfectly fit, ran a marathon runner, but he had surgery, I don't know, probably when he was a teenager, but back then, but it was the new one where they barely put a hole in you, right? I mean, they go different ways now. Before they used to cut you from top to bottom to get into there to do surgery. But the paperwork still said if you had this kind of surgery, it was an automatic disqualifier because they just assumed that was the kind of surgery you had, not that it was just a small hole to go in and fix whatever it was. So, but I think they're working on that. I mean, that's above my pay grade. But for me as chaplains, I just say at least try it, because especially they're so short right now. I mean, the Navy's waiving up to 55 years old to be a chaplain. In fact, I got a 53-year-old in who was able to do, he's doing great. He's just going to do his 9 years and get out. But so they're willing to work with us, but I think there's still a lot of stigma that they say they're trying to fix, but if you put it down, it's, holds everything for a while. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Sir. Yeah, I wish it could have been at our lunch table. We were talking about that with the priorities. But chaplaincy, I think basically it's more of a counseling mission field. For the few Lutherans that you'll find that are assigned to your unit, then you try to go bigger. If it's a base, you try to advertise, here's a Missouri Synod service on base. And so we just usually work harder. So our chaplains will do the Lutheran Missouri Synod service. But then if they have a rotation to help out with a Protestant service, obviously they don't violate our altar and pulpit fellowship. but they'll support in the sense of if they're the only ones, they'll do a service like an order of matins, service of the word. They'll be preaching if they have to rotate once a month or whatever the rotation is, but never with another clergy and never compromising, never communion because they can't obviously do the altar. So I think a lot, but it's definitely one-on-one ministry. I would say, and again, you current chaplains can tell me that's still pretty much the wheelhouse is just being with the troops, because it really is. It's the only place where you literally are with your flock 24/7, right? So one of our church fathers said you have to stink like your sheep. Talking about a pastor being a shepherd, a chaplain literally does that, right? So if they're going 30 days without a shower, you're going 30 days without a shower, wherever you are in the field. So I think it's really what the chaplain and what they want to do. Of course, it goes with rank too. But for a battalion chaplain, 0304, most of it's still one-on-one ministry, Bible studies, but a lot of opportunity for catechesis, because I know people are saying they're a lot less religious young people, but our experience has been they may put no religious preference on their dog tags or on their paperwork, but they'll say they're spiritual, not religious, or whatever phrase they want to use. But they have fun talking. I mean, you got 24/7, so you're talking about life issues and things, and you bring out Luther's Small Catechism. It's still a great discussion guide. They'll go through it to see what it all means. So but that's going to be one-on-one. There's not going to be, maybe a Bible study will kick off or grow, but yeah, you'll probably have, I don't know, a small Lutheran service wherever you are. Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. And that's what our chaplains, when I do the interview process, to struggle with, because they have to work that out in their own mind of the two kingdoms of when is your role as a military officer, or are you functioning as a pastor, in the sense that if a homosexual or lesbian couple comes in, you're obviously, they know who you are. And that's what I always tell people too. People in your unit know you by reputation, who you are already. So if they're coming in there, they know that you can't do it. So they're either, just really want to know, and you just say, I can't do that, but here's my chaplain assistant, or there's a chaplain over here that'll do that, or a social worker or something. And I've had pastors challenge me and say, well, you're referring people right to hell. If a Buddhist comes in or a Mormon, it's like, well, yeah, but I really do believe that, the constitution of the two realms, that this young man has a right for free exercise. So I'm just facilitating that. I'm not compromising who I am. Then I flip it again, like before. I said, if my Lutheran kid, his chaplain's a Mormon, I want that Mormon chaplain not to talk to them about their faith, but to say, hey, here's where you go. Here's a Lutheran chaplain, or I'll order a Lutheran study Bible or catechism. Talk to Deaconess Brinkley and get one for put them on my mailing list, somehow support them. But that is something that people have to work with, because I've had one that's thinking about it, because even announcing, I was just talking to at breakfast about that, is having a hard time even announcing what the command religious program is for newcomers brief, to say, oh yeah, the Catholics are meeting over here, the Wiccans are over here, the Baptists are over here, the whole command religious program, for the newcomers, just to say where everything is. He has a hard time right now doing that. And I said, well, that's what you have to struggle with. You're not saying that this is the way to heaven, you're just saying this is the commander's program and this is what's offered. So I don't know if that helps, but it really is. I think our chaplains are clear. At least my experience in my time is, even when they came to me as homosexuals, lesbians, struggling with whatever sin it was, when they left my office, they heard the word of God somehow, whether it was law or gospel, or they knew. And again, what the Holy Spirit did with that, after they left, I don't know. But they never left saying, oh, yeah, he supports my lifestyle. You know, it's like, this is okay. And it's like, no, they know that they didn't, I wasn't, oh, you're in there, throw them out of my office. You know, that would not work well either. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but does it? Or go ahead, follow up with.
Yeah, just that answer that piece of it. The other piece I was wondering, as the military visual system, right? The military system have a lot of kind of the concept of quality. So how difficult is it for military chaplain associated with LCMS to military structure where having female chaplains or other religions? If you're an LCMS, not particularly well educated person, you're like, well, I guess LCMS is equal to all these people. Chaplain's boss is a female pastor. What's wrong with female pastors? So how do you avoid the visuals that are just inherent with the military from causing kind of spiritual malformation because our chaplains having to fall on the military side of all the structure that there.
Yeah, visually it would be hard to, I mean, unless you could explain to the people, but I think for us, again, it's the two realms. They obviously a female senior chaplain has no ecclesiastical authority whatsoever over the chaplain. So there's no way that they can be forced to do anything spiritually that they say to do or do a worship with them or whatever they want to do. But they are a colonel or a lieutenant colonel or an admiral or a general by the office of that kingdom. So I don't know if that answers your question, but visually, yeah, some people would have a hard time with that, and they say, well, you have to, they can't force me to compromise who I am. In fact, I was one of those when I was deputy chief chaplain of the Marine Corps. I was the 06, but my boss was a female admiral who was the chaplain of the Marine Corps. And Dan Guard was her other 06 before he made admiral. I don't know if you know Dan Guard, but he's one of our Navy chaplains. And so she picked two Missouri Synod because they pick who they want for you. And I think it was just realizing the administrative, but when we had, like we planned the Marine Corps worship service, she goes, oh, I know you guys aren't gonna do that with me. But then she made an interesting comment. She goes, you know, I know that you won't do a worship service with me, but it's not just because I'm a woman. She goes, I also know you won't do it with the Baptist or the Methodist guy either. I said, no, that's all altar and pulpit fellowship. We have to be in fellowship with everything. So it's not just we're isolating a woman. It's I can't do it for anybody that we're not in fellowship with. So, but someone outside looking in, that would, you would just have to have a conversation because they could easily take it like, oh, Dan Guard and Craig Muehler worked for a woman chaplain. What does that look like? Or what did she? It was strictly administrative and military, the rank part, not the church part. So again, that's why I think our two kingdom theology really does help. Some people can't maneuver in that world. That tension is too much. Some of our other denominations that don't understand that. Sorry. Oh, the good news for me is that he's not a chaplain. So that was Wisconsin South, I think, right? So that DP had to deal with that. And now, of course, President Willie is in paradise now, so who was the DP. But we saw that. I was like, a chaplain probably wouldn't do that, or probably wouldn't accept it, first of all. But I do understand the things that came out, how you can be, it's not as clean as you think it is. Like you're told you're the only one up there. And the next thing you know, here comes, and that's happened to me before. I did a funeral for a guy that we told Christian I did it all. The funeral home, I walk out and here come the Elks. It's like nobody told me any of this stuff. It's like, well, they're going to undo everything I preached. So it's crazy. So there's things you can't control, but thankfully that one was not mine. So, sir. That's a great question. I, again, talked about that a little bit about lunch, but for my own research, I'm not a great historian like you, which excellent, by the way. I want to hear the whole paper. But it really started in, when we started upping our chaplains, World War I, 1917. Again, the push against the Germans, right? So it was one of those pressures again, when we started to do the English language, like you pointed out, trying to make that, we're Americans, we're not part of the German regime that's going on. And then World War II is when I really could see, and what I read, that we almost had the opportunity at that point to take a stand and be like Eastern Orthodox with a special group, but I think the pressure to be Protestant, we went in with the Protestant because we didn't want to be German Lutheran, so we kind of sold our soul, I think. This is Craig Muehler's opinion, and I don't think we're ever going to get that back, because I try it now because we are so distinctive. We're no different than, and I try to use the example of an Eastern, when I talk to the chiefs of chaplains, I say, look, an Eastern Orthodox guy shows up at your chapel or at your base, you're going to give him his space and you're going to advertise an Eastern Orthodox service. When a Missouri Synod guy shows up, you try to do whatever you can to talk us into just doing a liturgical Protestant service, or we have to fight tooth and nail to say, no, we're distinctive. Our guys can't get the sacrament from anybody else. We're very distinctive. So I don't know if that answers the question. Yeah, it could be. I mean, again, the ecumenical movement was strong, right? It was big. But I think for the military just to categorize us, I think it was, and that could have been some of the rationale that the Missouri Synod leadership had. Again, that would be definitely a good historical project. Anybody here working on their PhD or something wants to? But it would be interesting to see why that happened. Why? Because back then, even we were different than Baptists. I mean, they called us baby baptizers, right? Generic, right? They always use that term, or because the others couldn't do that and we could. So there was always that distinction, of what Lutherans brought to the table. But I think that was still part of the ramifications for that. It's the same thing with what's a whole other topic. I think he's standing up, so I think it's time to wind it down. But really get your get your blood going. The same thing with like flags in churches. That came back, and I get calls from veterans in tears that say, my pastor took the flags out of the church and put them in the closet or in the back. And I say, it is an adiaphron. I hate that they did it that way. They could at least hopefully work through it with you, but just to say, Jesus was an American. I said, okay, we got it, but you're an American citizen, our two kingdom theology again. It's just some of those things. But I think that I don't know if that really was off target, but that's the kind of thing we get when they're trying to work in that tension of the two realms. It's like, it's hard.
All right, thank you to Chaplain Muehler. This conversation can continue at the after party.
Yep, I'll be here. I'm actually staying there, so
Stay up all night.
all night. Well, if you have a cigar, I'll even stay longer. I didn't know if that was contraband.